and said, man, I've been doing this for 2 years. I haven't even taken a paycheck. And he says, oh, yeah, I know the feeling. He says, I went 7 years before my first paycheck. I'm normal. Okay, that's great.
Right.
And that was reassuring because I realized like that is sometimes what happens in entrepreneurship. And when you can relate to others, and that's why I think it's so important for entrepreneurs to rely on one another.
For sure.
Because we do get that tunnel vision, but we also think that those problems are only ours to carry. And we start talking, you get so much strength from other entrepreneurs, and there's an energy that comes from just that camaraderie.
All right, Jon, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We're excited to have you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
I know we've got several businesses to talk about. You've got some really cool stories, and you've got this fascination with trucks that I want to get into as well. That's so fun. Have you always been entrepreneurial?
Yeah, I think so. Looking back, yes. Originally, I thought I was going to go into the medical field and decided, one semester into college, I hated it. And I just knew I'd be a terrible doctor. And as I started getting into, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but as I got into business, I'm like, yeah, it's a perfect fit. But at that point, I looked back and thought, yeah, let's say I did yard care as kind of a business in high school. I'd kind of come up with different ideas. I liked the kind of the ideation process of solving a problem. And so yeah, I'd say that kind of entrepreneurial spirit stuck with me since I was little.
Okay, that's awesome. So you have several businesses, and we went and visited one in Cedar City. So you've got the Fun Center that's out in Cedar City. How did that come about? Is it something that just you had a vision, you wanted to do it, or you just kind of landed in your lap and an opportunity came up and you jumped on?
So I think part of it almost needs to rewind a little bit on some of those things, because so about 10 or 15 years ago, I was in a situation where I was an executive for a business, and at that time I had maybe capital to use, but not time. So I didn't have an opportunity to, I didn't have a side hustle because I was just fully invested and committed to an executive role. And so I started investing in businesses, and over the years that stemmed to a lot of different things. I've had investments in real estate. I've done investing in hard money lending and in startup companies, and I've done a lot of angel investing. But the Fun Center came about because I had been an investor in that building and had an opportunity where during COVID there were some hard challenges, and it came down to where we needed to foreclose on the building, unfortunately, and part of that process was turning kind of lemons into lemonade. And I dealt with a lot of business turnarounds before, and we said, how do we deal something with this? So we took over the business, we took over the building, started the Fun Center, and have built that into a great business. We've had over 100 employees over the years. We've had we've been best in Southern Utah, I think 3 years in a row. We were deemed the most innovative business of 2022 in Iron County. So it's been kind of a fun challenge. We've got a great team there that manages it, and so I'm there very rarely, I guess.
Yes, no, that's an awesome story. So you had tenants in there, and during COVID it started just going south.
Yeah.
So that's where you took it and say, okay, I've got this opportunity. I've got to figure out something to do with this building because it's got to generate revenue.
Correct.
I don't want to lose on it. And so let's just put another business in there that I control.
Yep.
And so what business was it before?
It was also a Fun Center.
Oh, okay.
But during the process of COVID and just everything that's going on, that business had closed, and then we had started over and bought new equipment and just tried to make it work.
That's awesome. So I'm assuming that you hadn't had that type of business before. You just kind of went into it and I don't really know. Maybe I don't know this one all that well. I know a lot of other business as well, but maybe I don't know this particular one, and I just need to jump in and figure out a few things and make it work.
That's kind of the joy of entrepreneurship.
Right.
I've been involved with, I think my wife and I count, I think probably 28 or 29 different businesses I've been involved with. Plenty have failed. Some were a good fit, some weren't. But it's interesting because you get that variety, and I love that. And I never thought I'd be in the Fun Center space. Other things I've done, I never thought I'd be in those areas either. But you learn, you try to get up to speed, and you try to make something happen with it. But it's also kind of nice having that variety because with other past experiences, you can bring that in from a different industry and say, okay, how can we look at this differently than maybe others are looking at this? And so that creates opportunities as well.
I want to get into you have the story of the UV company. Mm-hmm. And this is actually the first time that I saw you because there was that event that we went to.
Yeah, the Startup Grind.
Startup Grind, okay. So we went up there and I saw you up there talking about the story and just kind of everything that you were going through to get this business launched. And it was just, it was a grind for many years. And then a few months ago, you posted about taking your first check from that business 5 years. And I thought that was so cool because I was like, here's Jon sticking through it, no matter everything that's come up with that business and sticking through it until something comes from it. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, where you had this idea, or I'm not sure where it came from. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and that story that led to that moment where you're there and like, hey, after 5 years, I finally got something. It paid off. It took a long time, but it paid off, and it was a grind.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think everyone knows that's been in business that everything takes longer than expected. I mean, that's a given.
Always.
Also, talking on the variety, kind of like the Fun Center, something I never thought I'd get into is UV disinfection, and but it comes back from my angel investing, where at the time it was, let's look at ideas, let's find opportunities to invest in, and I'd seen an idea that someone had presented at the Atwood Innovation Plaza, Wayne Provost and Bill Christensen, and they said, maybe we can take UV light and sanitize airport security bins. And if you don't know, those airport security bins are 18 times dirtier than the toilets in airports. And if you travel a lot like I did at the time, you see a lot of dirty bathrooms, and to think that the bins are even dirtier. So
just so you know, this is in my head every time.
Oh, I know. Everyone tells me the same thing. People text me all the time from the airport and say, "Oh, I'm at the airport," and I'm like, "I know exactly what you're saying."
No, like I almost don't want to know now.
Yeah,
but
go
ahead.
It's bad. And so we developed a device that could do that, and we can sanitize those bins in about 3 seconds, giving you a passenger the first opportunity. As soon as you touch it, you're the first person to touch that bin after it's been sanitized. Huge win for travel.
Yeah.
But we found quickly in the process that working with the TSA and government agencies is not a fast process. And 5 years in, I don't know that we're any closer. But throughout that process, we were able to pilot the device at LAX, which is one of the busiest airports in the world, and had a great experience there. And we've ended up in this bureaucracy loop for about 5 years. So we pivoted. We got into medical and food space. And have seen different challenges in those areas as the hospital market fell apart after COVID and things like that, but we kept going. And that's, we've seen awesome things that have happened. We've also seen big monumental challenges that we faced, but it's one of those things where you get traction, you kind of just keep going with it. And it's kind of the point where it's like, what do you do besides keep moving forward? So.
I love that you pivoted, and I think that's an important lesson for people, because sometimes, like if you're in a job, right, sometimes people just think that you have to just stay there, right? You can't really do anything about it. And same thing in some people with business, especially small business, you're going to have challenges, and sometimes you think that with that challenge, when that comes, it's like, I just can't do this anymore, I need to close. So I like that you have this big challenge, you've got this great idea, and you've got this huge challenge, and you're like, okay, that's not going to work right now because there's so much red tape that we've got to jump through, and something's just stopping it. What do we do now? So how did you get into that where it's like, okay, we've got to pivot? How did you come up with those ideas of what to pivot to?
Yeah. So part of it was seeing where our technology could be used in other places. We developed a specialty in UV light and how that could be used for sanitization or disinfection. And so we thought, okay, what other opportunities exist there? So we started looking at food, what could be used in food to sanitize food before it gets processed. Food recalls are a $55 billion a year problem in the United States alone each year. And so we've worked with a couple of multi-billion-dollar food companies. We've installed line equipment that allows us to sanitize the food before it goes into packaging. Hospitals is another area where we started going into hospital space, and we had a company that said, hey, we want to merge with you. We've been in the hospital space since 2008. And so we've seen some awesome things there. And the challenge is just so unique in our space, and COVID was a good thing for the UV business, but also completely devastating for the UV business. Brought a lot of products that maybe couldn't really do what they said they could, but people were in this just mindset that we got to do anything we can to solve the problem right now. And but it's been interesting kind of coming out of that, the last couple of years, and as you fight those challenges, it's just, hospitals are just devastated, and it's been a tough challenge for sure. But part of it's that, kind of what we talked about is how much do you keep going? How much do you keep pushing on that? And we look at it as, some of the challenges we face with hospitals, no matter how much money or time and effort we put into it, we can't change some of the situations they're facing with budgets. I mean, some of those processes on their end are taking 4 years for even a small PO, because they're like, we just don't have the budget. We want the product, we just can't get this done. And so we just learned, okay, we got to control what we can control. And me being kind of a control freak that's usually a lot more than I can even do right now. But it's been taking, okay, what are the steps that we can take right now and do it. And so I've had to have a lot more patience than I think I'm capable of at times. But it's just allowed us to keep going. Okay, let's just wait and do what we can.
So being in the manufacturing and production space, like, how do you get through the challenge of like timeline for, payables? Like when you're doing production and you have this PO that's due and you don't know when it's going to get paid, especially with hospitals, like how do you budget for that?
Well, fortunately, we were able to have sufficient inventory. We do a lot of custom work, so that's kind of a one-off basis where we get a deposit, we do the build, and then we install it. Okay. But in a lot of cases, we've had the inventory, which is nice to be able to meet those needs throughout the last period of time.
And you just have a runway for waiting
Correct.
for them to pay.
Yeah.
So during that time before you pivoted, when you had this path that you were going down, and you realized that path wasn't going to work right now, what did that feel like? Was it pretty stressful? Was there a time where you thought, I don't know if we're going to make this work. Maybe we can't. Maybe this just isn't going to. Maybe it's just not a thing. And we've put up a bunch of cash through it, but maybe it's not going to work out. Did that cross your mind during that time?
Almost a daily basis. Yeah, that's because you're thinking, okay, was this a bad decision? Okay, maybe it wasn't. Okay, we're seeing a little bit of good progress here. So let's kind of just explore that a little bit. Over the last 5 years, we've grown to 13 patents. We've installed in multi-billion-dollar companies. We've worked with companies around the world, and we've shipped around the world. But at the same time, you run into those challenges. You think, oh man, is this worth it? And but part of it's just, okay, we're seeing the progress. And you have to look for that light at the end of the tunnel, because when you're right in the thick of it, you're thinking, okay, is this worth it? And a lot of times it probably isn't worth it, but you see enough to where it just gives you the motivation to keep going. And so part of it was, okay, well, if we're hitting these roadblocks, how do I simplify some of those roadblocks to where if we have to wait, we can? And that resulted in us saying, okay, well, how do we just cut expenses down as low as possible? Let's wait for the market to correct a little bit and do what we can in the meantime just to be patient. And that's what we've done.
So one of the things that I had a challenge with when I was in the thick of it, right, is I would just find myself going into this like bottomless pit, because you're just like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get to the next step? What was a strategy that you found for like getting out of that mindset,
It's really just trying to look forward. I think the thing that has helped in my career is, I think we all have this fear of failure. And when you look at some of the challenges that you face, you think, okay, if I fail or this doesn't work out, then I must be doing something wrong. And that's a hard thing to swallow sometimes. You're thinking, okay, I want to be able to fix this. As entrepreneurs, we're fixers. And when I look back and thought, if it fails or if I have to move on, that's going to be okay. Life will go on. I'll find a new opportunity or whatever. But that kind of helped minimize to where when you're in the thick of it, it feels like everything is a problem. Everything's crashing down. But when you can step back and say, okay, this problem's a problem. I can move on. I can find other solutions. It really gave me a lot of, it kind of eased that stress a lot. And I was able to just kind of be patient. And like I said, the patience was a hard thing for me. And I'm continually learning that.
Yeah. I love that saying, like, how is this happening for me, right? Versus why is this happening to me? Like, that's one of my favorite phrases, and one that's gotten me through so many challenges.
Well, one example kind of on that is we started seeing the market kind of shifting, and I felt like we kind of got an early insight on that, seeing something's going to shift here as COVID kind of comes out, or it kind of gets further in the rearview mirror. And I talked to our board and said, I think we need to make some drastic changes right now. And that resulted in us, unfortunately, laying off staff. It involved closing one of our locations and simplifying, cut every expense we possibly could. And that seemed really dramatic. But we quickly saw when the problems came, we had a lot of competitors that filed bankruptcy, went out of business. And I even had CEOs of competing companies that have followed up with me. We kind of became friends during some of this hard times. And they said, how did you survive? Like, we didn't. And I said, well, we just tried to look ahead and see, and we could kind of see that things were falling apart, and so we took action. But and that also helped too, when you realize that it wasn't just a symptom of maybe our actions, our business decisions. It was an industry-wide thing that was plaguing everybody, and so a lot didn't make it, but we've hung on, and our thought was if we can be one of the last in the market, we've got a good patent portfolio and we have a good product, and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Sometimes during those times, you're just kind of making the best decisions that you can with whatever the resources you have available, right? Drawing from whatever you can. Are there any, looking back at that moment, knowing what you know now, are there any mistakes that you made? Are there any decisions that you made that maybe, weren't as good, and then you had to course correct a little bit?
Yeah, I think early on, almost being spread too thin, because it was, looking at trying to get into the TSA, we maybe spent a little bit too much time on that and tried to do other things at the same time. But if we would have said, okay, you know what, maybe this is going to work, let's jump into something that's going to move really, really fast. So I think we could have, maybe during some of those times with, COVID, where there was a lot more of a scramble on trying to, all the disinfection, the TSA was going to be a really long-term play, and it still is. But we probably could have gotten in a lot faster in some of these other markets and made that the primary focus, like food. It's a $55 billion a year problem. We're there and we're working, but it's been a lot longer journey versus let's take everything and just put all in one basket.
Yeah, I love that. A lot of times entrepreneurs are just so afraid of making a mistake, and it's just part of it. And you got to learn from them and move on. You've taken some of these skills and you've used those things to help to turn around some other businesses as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think with some of these other businesses that you've helped turn around, like what do you think is something that causes them to really have an issue?
From what I've seen with either consulting for turnarounds or actually taking over and turning around businesses, a lot of times we get a lot of tunnel vision. We do things a certain way for a long time. And I've seen a lot of the businesses that I've gone into and helped turn around is that things just get really disorganized. And I've learned that the more organized a business is, they're usually more profitable. And systems are in place. Things are tidy. In the operations, not just in terms of like messiness, but things are tidy and look good in all aspects. And a lot of times people say, well, I can't do that unless maybe I got more help or I've got more money. But I've learned it's almost inverse. If you can do that early on and have things organized and structured, everything runs better. And so as we've gone in and turned around businesses, we've said, okay, what's lacking here? And it's usually that no one has a clue what's happening with the accounts receivable. There's not systems in place. The people, the org chart, they're not sure who's managing who, what's going on. And so it's just kind of dialing in those things. And some of the businesses we've gone into in the first year, we've been able to get revenues up 250% just by dialing in their normal operations. And so it's kind of changing the dials and pushing the buttons that kind of hone it in, not anything real dramatic.
Yeah, that makes sense, just having everything organized. I think I've experienced that same thing in business back in 2008 because I had a mortgage company then, and we went through this huge crash, and that was my first time where I was like, what am I doing? Should I even be doing this? Should I move on or whatever? And I was trying to figure out how to get out of it and get revenue back up and start making money again. And that was the thing, is I noticed that in that moment I was stressed, and it was because there was chaos, everything was disorganized. So I spent those couple of months just making everything, I needed to know exactly where everything was, where the numbers were, who was doing what, all of that, and it was like within 3 months it turned around.
Well, as an entrepreneur, you carry everything on your shoulders, or at least you think you do. And so you have a tendency that when things go south, you always blame yourself. Hey, I must have made a bad decision, or why isn't this working? It's all my fault. But when you recognize that, okay, I control what I can control, and other things are just going to happen. There may be downturns in the economy. There may be, market conditions in your industry that tank. Technology that comes out that disrupts what you're doing. But you have to look at it and just recognize that it's okay to have down months. But, because we're always thinking it always has to just keep going up and up and up. But as we go through that process, that's kind of inevitable. You're going to have those periods of time where something goes south, but being able to weather that storm, there's always sunshine at the end.
Yeah, for sure. You're big, based on your post, you're big in the self-development.
Absolutely.
And I love that. You post a lot of things that are just are really cool. What got you into self-development?
I think a lot of it, looking back, most people that know me really personally, if you follow my social media, you've probably seen, I've had anxiety my entire life. Severe anxiety. I love public speaking, which is kind of an anomaly, but love public speaking. But I've had bouts of depression different times throughout my life. And when I started, talking openly about that, I realized how many other people were struggling with the same thing. And I think that's what we face, whether it's in entrepreneurship or our personal lives, is that we always think that our problems are just us. And I think that's where a lot of the unity comes as we talk in a community setting of hey, these are the problems I'm facing. And people start realizing, hey, that helped me because I was going through the same problem. So I look at it, I believe really firmly in goals. Goals are an exciting thing, but that's always kind of been a motivation of, hey, I might not be feeling real great right now, but I know what I'm working toward, and I know what's in the future for me. And so trying to keep my sights on those goals, and you know, I might be in the rut right now, but what I'm working toward is going to really excite me, and I'm going to get out of this. And so a lot of that's just about self-improvement. You know, they're like the cliche, life is short.
Yeah.
We have so much potential, and sometimes we just minimize that. And you know, let's go after things that we really want to achieve.
I appreciate you mentioning that because it's so true, and that's why self-development's been such a big part for me. I mean, I'm doing so much of it every year, and actually for the same reasons. Just having I've had a lot of anxiety, you know, when I was in my 20s or so, 20s, and some in my 30s as well. And when you're in those moments, you feel like your world is just crashing around you, and there is no way out. There's nothing that you can do to change it. And I think with that self-development, if you're continually learning, you learn that, hey, this is a moment. It's not everything. It's just a moment in time, and that passes. And it's also good to learn that good things pass also. So you might have a great time. It's not going to stay forever. But if you're having a bad time, it's not going to stay for either. You know, it's kind of moving around between, you know, back and forth. And that's okay. That's life. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think the self-development helps when you're in those bottom moments to realize that, hey, this isn't permanent, even though it feels like it's never going to end. It's always going to be there, but it's more temporary. So I appreciate when you share those things, because I think people who have gone through it and then experience some success later, they think they have a lot to share to show that, hey, I've been there too, and here's what I do to get out of there. The cold plunges, the whatever it is, you know, you do to get out of there. And those people that are in it that feel like they're stuck, maybe it gives them a little bit of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so true. I mean, it's easy to look at successes of anybody and say, man, why am I not doing that? You know, they're there. And there's certain things I'm proud of that I've accomplished. But at the same time, I recognize like some of my shortcomings is, you know, I'm really bad in my head. You know, you know, my self-talk is really bad at times. And so part of those things that I do every morning that, you know, I'm religious about, I don't miss those things because that sets my entire day. And it's having to remind myself, you know, when something goes wrong and I'm blaming myself or bad talking myself.
You cold plunge.
A lot of times I do, actually. But you have to reset that. And the problem is a lot of times we all of us do it. We get in a funk and we stay there. And so we have to take the steps that are getting us out of that. It's like, yeah, okay, today's been a crappy day. Everything that could have gone wrong did. But I'm going to just reset. I'm going to just go back at it tomorrow. And sometimes you get 2 or 3 of those days or months at a time that feel like you're just in the pits every day. But that consistency of, you know, things, you hit those roadblocks and they start breaking apart. They start freeing up, but it does take consistency.
Yeah. One of the things that I found that when, you know, I get in this cycle of negative self-talk, like, I'm like, okay, who can I listen to that's going to not be myself? So I just automatically turn on like my favorite audiobooks, and I've probably listened to them like 4 or 5 times, but like Jen Sincero, You Are a Badass, like that is like one of my go-tos for just getting me out of that loop, you know? And so it's just having that positive feedback where you can be like, okay, I've got this, like, screw the fear, let's just go, like, because what do you have to lose, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You talked about being in those moments and kind of resetting, right? What are some things that you do to reset? Like first off, catching yourself, like, hey, okay, I'm in a moment. I feel like everything's crashing down, and maybe it's really not. I'm in a moment. What are some of the things that you do to reset and kind of get out of that so you can get back on the right path?
I think for me, a lot of times, you know, when you encounter a problem that you're facing, or and the stress starts piling on, it feels like everything else just keeps mounting. You know, you just pile more and more on, and you whether it's, you know, in your chest, you just feel like I can't take the pressure anymore. A lot of times, I just have to pull myself out of that and just say, okay, I'm going to just set everything aside right now. I'm going to go drive, you know, or I'll go sit somewhere and just think for a little bit. Usually, if we can kind of distance ourselves from that a little bit and step out of that, it gives us a chance to kind of, you know, calm our breathing down and be okay, what are the problems that I'm really facing right now? And when you can minimize those and kind of get them out of your direct observation, you look at it and say, okay, I can handle this. Okay, maybe I can find a solution to that. But a lot of times we just look at it so emotionally, but if we can look at it objectively, that really helps. So, you know, there's times where it used to feel like I feel like I'm a hyper-productive person where it's like I had to use every minute of the day effectively. And I've learned that doesn't really do you a lot of good. There's times where there's a single computer game that I enjoy playing, and I'll find myself, I need 10 minutes. I can just go sit there and play the game for about 10 minutes, and then I'm reset. I've taken my mind off of the stresses, and I can come back with a little bit of a clear mind and be able to kind of visit those things.
I love that. So 10 minutes and you can have a reset. And that's the thing is like some people will stay in it for days, and it's just because they maybe they don't know the techniques, or they haven't thought of it, or they haven't tried it, or whatever. Yeah. And if you stay in it for days, that's where you lose that consistency of the things that actually matter.
Yeah.
So I love that, just ideas of things that somebody can do to reset. And there's a couple of things that I do. The cold plunge is one of them. So if it's in the middle of the day and if I'm working from home that day and I'm like, okay, my brain is just not where I need it to be, like that cold plunge, it's like within seconds, it changes it.
Yeah.
Probably because you get in there and your brain's like,
the 15
we're
seconds
dying
to catch your breath. Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you come out, you've got so much energy and you're better for it. But so I love having those ideas as far as resetting.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Makes a big difference. And the other thing is just movement, taking action, because a lot of times when you're sitting there, you don't feel like doing anything. You're just overwhelmed, you're stressed, and you want to just go sit and
cry in the closet
and dwell in your stress. But I've learned that just getting outside in fresh air. So sometimes if I'm really stressed, I'll just leave my office and just walk around the block or something. Come back and something physiologically, you're just more reset and ready to go.
Yeah, something, because I find myself in that place a lot when you just start thinking of all the things that you have on your list and you're like, oh my gosh, like how am I ever going to get this done? And it's paralyzing, right? And so one of the things that I found is that when I can write it down and then prioritize, like that works really well for me, because then when I see it on paper, I'm like, okay, like that's not that bad. I can do these things first and then get to the other things and not the end of the world, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like really compartmentalizing has worked really well for me, and because I get in that mode all the time where I'm just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, it can mess up our judgment at times because we start reacting emotionally, or we're just so frustrated. We just want that kind of frustration to be gone, or that stress to be gone. We start doing whatever it takes just to do that, rather than just saying, okay, let me just chill for a second.
The world's not ending.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing to do. It really is. But it works.
Yeah, definitely.
I think those that are people who are, successful have really learned how to maybe master the emotions. Maybe not even master, but have learned better than average on how to control them, how to learn to use them as their advantage and not let them control you.
I'd heard this story years ago, and I've tried for years to find this story. Maybe somebody can find it, but I'd heard in a book there was I want to say it was a U.S. president that was some sort of building for a photo shoot, and there was a skylight up above, and there was a photographer that was kind of taking pictures down. This is probably in the 1800s or early 1900s, and was taking some sort of pictures and leaned enough on the glass that the glass shattered, and everyone just scatters underneath because they hear this thing falling. And whoever this president was just looked up and just watched as all this glass was falling toward him, and nothing hit him, and he just kind of slowly stepped out of the way, and people said, how'd you stay so calm? And he says, it wasn't a problem unless it was coming at me. And I thought that was really interesting, just the nerves of steel, where you can just look up and say, okay, I will move once there's a problem. And we go right so quickly to that panic mode,
right,
rather than say, okay, what's really happening here? What is the worst situation that could happen?
Yeah.
And then decide, what action to take for that.
Yeah, I mean, because when you think of fear, it's like this, Layla Hermosi said it best. She said, fear is a mile wide and an inch deep, right? Because it's really not as bad as it seems. But when you're looking at it, you're like, holy crap, this seems so insurmountable. Mm-hmm. But it's like when you step into the fear, it's really not that bad.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that fear, too, is that so often we try to avoid that, or we try to avoid the action because of how scary it can be. But a lot of times you think, okay, what's the worst that can happen? And then sometimes that happens, and then there's something worse that can happen. But you realize throughout those processes, though, that as you come out of it, you thought, okay, I made it through that. And, like the saying, you've survived 100% of your worst days. And but you realize, like, looking back at my career, the things that were stressful and scary before, I'm like, it's so funny that was what was scary now. And now I've got different sets of fears. But that's part of that growth that we have throughout our lives, where you go through all that pain, you go through the discomfort, and each one of those fears is really meant to become a little bit bigger, and the challenge is meant to become a little bit bigger. And but it's amazing just the strength and resilience we develop as we just keep moving forward.
Yeah, so I have to share this. So in my bakery, one of my favorite quotes, I had this quote wall, and I love quotes. But my favorite one was like, once you become fearless, life becomes limitless. And it's not that like you never have fear. It's just when you can be bigger than your fear, then you can do anything, right? So
there's a good book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Yeah.
And we hold ourselves back, but when you get through it or start going through it, you realize, okay, that wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be.
Right.
So true.
And I think sometimes, so we have, because you mentioned a moment ago that sometimes that worst case really happens, right? But it's so rare that worst case really happens. A lot of times it's worse up here than what it actually is.
Almost always.
Yeah, almost always. Like 99% of the time, it's so much worse out here than what it actually is. And so my life coach, Brett, you know, he gave me some good advice one day, saying things aren't normally as bad as they seem, and they don't tend to be as good as they might seem either. So if you have something you think, oh, this is going to be the best thing ever, it might not end up being as good as what it seems, but it also might not end up being as bad. So if you have something where something just happened and you think like it's going to be the end of everything, it might not be as bad.
Yeah.
So I always think about that when there's those moments and something just, there's some dead stop that it just hit into that's like, okay, you can't go past this. And I'm thinking there's no way around it. It's like, okay, remember, it might not be as bad as it seems in this moment. I got to just get out of this moment, and then I'll be able to see whatever the next path is or get around this obstacle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I loved it. So you have, you love trucks.
I always have.
And I remember when we went to dinner a while ago and you said, I just bought a semi-truck. Now, I've never heard that come out of anybody's mouth, ever. I just bought this semi-truck and I just drove it home. And you showed us pictures of it and restored it, and it was really a cool story. So where does this come from with these trucks?
I've always loved cars, and
Okay.
so I've always had projects. I'm kind of a simple person, so I never would go out and blow money on something fancy, but I like, I bought Jeeps. I've liked fixing up old trucks and just something that's fun, taking something that maybe looks ugly and run down and fixing it up and giving it new life. And that's kind of where I think some of the business stuff has come in, where I like turning around businesses, simply from seeing that before and after. But I've always wanted to learn how to drive a semi-truck. I don't know what it is. It's the power, the size, the sound of them. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to buy a semi. I don't know how to drive one. It's way different than driving a car, not just due to the size, but everything. Even if you can drive a manual transmission, a semi-truck doesn't shift the same way. And so I got behind the wheel, and ironically, you can drive a semi-truck as long as it's not for business as a personal vehicle. So I drove a semi as a personal vehicle, and
I love this.
Learned how to use the air brakes, learned how to shift 15 gears, and all along the way, my 9-year-old son learned a lot about semi-trucks, and just an awesome experience.
Now, when you first took it home, it went, what, like 7 miles per hour?
Correct. It was stuck. There's something, I could not get it to go any faster. No matter what gear I was in, it wouldn't go any faster. And I tried. I replaced parts on it, and fortunately had a kind guy in our neighborhood who's a diesel mechanic. And he says, I think I know what the problem is. And whoever had hooked something up had reversed 2 of the air hoses, and all it was doing was keeping it from being able to shift. And so we got that fixed. But then we cruise all over southern Utah in it. So
in case somebody else has that problem.
That's right. Now I know how to fix somebody else who brings home a semi to surprise their wife. I mean, it's
oh, and she was surprised.
It's just in your personality to just tinker and fix and make
it's
find something that's not
I've
working,
always worked
fix
on
it,
something.
make it work.
Part of it's just that I have a hard time sitting still and finding a hobby, and cars have always kind of been that thing that I just enjoy working on.
Oh, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Oh, I was just, so how does Kristen feel about this?
Oh, she loves it.
She is a saint.
She is. She's extremely patient, but fortunately, I've never lost on a vehicle. I've had, I think, 30-something vehicles since we've been married. We've been married 18 years, and so it's kind of my fun thing to do. And I don't go do a lot of things a lot of people do. I don't buy a lot of the other toys and things, and it's just my thing. I've had motorcycles, cars, tractors, semis, and look for a good deal and then have fun with it.
Yeah.
So she comes home and she's like, uh-oh, what's parked in the driveway now?
So mine is cars. Hers is Sherwin-Williams paint and rugs. And I always give her a hard time. Okay, you found another rug. You found another car. And just it's how we keep a strong marriage, I guess.
I love that. I wanted to get into something with really about managing money and capital, because there's people who want to be entrepreneurs, and we've heard several stories about people just being trying to keep their living expenses so lean, and then using the other capital to kind of generate business. I wanted to get what your thoughts were on that. So if somebody's young and they're just looking to start business, like what would your advice be to them as far as, hey, do this with your money so that you can create something later on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many cases where I think we have this mindset, especially in the United States, where we're so fortunate. There's certainly financial challenges for many people, but we're so fortunate what we have, and I think a lot of times we think that our needs are really a lot greater than they really are. And I think we see a lot of cases where people are saying, hey, I want to start a business, I just don't have any money for it. Well, you've got an $800 truck payment. Okay, what could you do with another $800 a month? You just bought a cheap car, and are driving in. Or I have to have the more expensive house. Okay, could you rent an apartment for a little while? I've always tended to be kind of a frugal person, and that's allowed me to set money aside and to invest in it, and that's something I've personally enjoyed doing, is being able to take that capital and say, okay, what kind of idea can I support that can help grow, and that's why I've been able to invest in 12 or 13 different companies. But I think the biggest thing too is that if I were to look back on my career, the advice that I would give regarding finances is that I could have taken bigger risks because of my age, fewer commitments. I didn't have kids at the time where it was like, okay, I got to make sure that I'm set up for their situation, providing for them and school and everything else. But that's one regret that I'd probably say is that, okay, I didn't have as much to lose then, so what risks could I have taken that maybe I was scared to take? And part of that may have been, okay, I'm gonna sacrifice. I like having the money in the savings account, but what if I put that all in on a business or something? I've done that before, and it's failed, and that's crappy. That's a crappy situation, but you recover from it. And I think we hold ourselves back because of that fear of, what's the worst that could happen? Well, you lose everything in your bank account. You start over.
What was that like when you went through that? Did you put all the money into the business and it failed? Did you think, okay, maybe this means business isn't for me? Or did you think, okay, this is just a bump in the road and I'm going to keep going?
Yeah, that thought definitely goes to your head of, okay, maybe I'm not cut out for this. That's the common thing that I think everyone thinks.
For sure.
But at the same time, you take, okay, what didn't work on that case? And part of it was, okay, we weren't aggressive enough. Okay, how do we be more aggressive on the next venture? Or we weren't well capitalized. Okay, how do we find investors for the next business? You start taking all that, and with 28 or 29 different businesses where I've been an owner or an operator of, plenty of those have failed. But you take all that, and I'm like, I know what to look for now. If I get back into this industry, what didn't work the first time? And that's a really hard pill to swallow. But I'm inspired by stories of, the common one of Thomas Edison, the light bulb. We all know that story.
Yes.
And or people that have started businesses in their 60s or 70s, and they take all that life experience. Okay, what's going to work this time? And that's that element of just keeping going, continuing to just do what you can.
People are so afraid to fail that sometimes they don't try it. Right? They're so afraid to fail, and you just got to get beyond that. It's inevitable. You're going to have some failures. Correct. That's okay. It's part of the process.
I think I'd rather have that failure than the regret of saying, man, I wish I would have tried that business. I thought I could have made that work. And even the ones that didn't pan out the way that I thought they would, it was an exciting memory. It was fun. It's like, hey, we did it and it didn't work. Okay, maybe we'll try it again down the road. I think it's Google that has the philosophy, at least they did, where it was fail fast and fail often or something like that. Mm-hmm. Because they wanted to encourage their employees to take risks, calculated risk, of course, but be willing to make mistakes and have things not work out, and then be able to get out of it and move on to something else. I think that's kind of the hard balance of, how long do you stay there? But if you can make that mistake and say, okay, this isn't going to work, let's move on to the next thing that might work. That may fail. Great, let's move on to the next thing. I met an entrepreneur recently. I saw him as like, this guy has been really successful. He's had all these successful businesses, and he has. He's had a lot of success. But he posted something on LinkedIn where he said, he actually listed every one of his businesses that he'd started. This one failed, this one failed, this one failed, this one failed. He went through probably 10 or 15 of them. And he says, now I'm starting a new business, and this one's different. And it was. He was having more success with that business. I thought, look at that experience of 10 to 15 businesses that didn't work out. And so it's always relatable when you can see it with other entrepreneurs.
Well, and I think that, it's how you define failure, right? If you define it as like a stopping point, then, that's your failure. But if you define it as, failing isn't, devastating if you take it as, these are all just lessons to help me move forward in the next thing, and like you learn from them. It's not a failure if you learned something from it. So.
You're spot on, because we have a tendency as entrepreneurs to make our business part of us, and
right.
it's an extension of who we are as a person. But you have to separate that and recognize that if the business fails, it doesn't make me a failure, and that's what I think we play in our heads a lot. And when you step back at that, okay, maybe the business failed, but I'm still a kind and generous person, or I'm still happy. I still take care of my kids. I still work hard. All those things that make us who we are. We have to be proud of those things, because it'll just drag us down. When we tie up with business.
So what you're saying is I'm not actually the cheesecake lady?
You can be the cheesecake lady.
I feel like I'm going to be known for that forever.
That's a hard thing to do, because a lot of times your identity is wrapped up around whatever your business is. And so I know a lot of people who, if their business is down a little bit, they're just crushed, and it just affects them as a human.
And I was right there.
And it's hard to disconnect those things.
And it's hard because you think, it's easy to look around and say, well, that business just seems to be thriving, doing really, really well, and that one's really successful. How are they doing it? And then you run into challenges in your business, and it's easy to think, okay, I must be doing something wrong, or I don't want to tell anybody that I'm struggling in my business when it looks like theirs is doing really well.
Right.
But I've noticed when you open up on that, you realize like everyone's having the same problem. Like that Facebook post you brought up where I went 57 months without taking a paycheck. I kept putting money into the business, not taking anything out. And I thought, man, this is crazy. And I remember talking to a friend and a mentor of mine, and said, man, I've been doing this for 2 years. I haven't even taken a paycheck. And he says, yeah, I know the feeling. He says, I went 7 years before my first paycheck. I thought, I'm normal. Okay, that's great. Right. And that was reassuring, because I realized like that is sometimes what happens in entrepreneurship. And when you can relate to others, and that's why I think it's so important for entrepreneurs to rely on one another. For sure. Because we do get that tunnel vision, but we also think that those problems are only ours to carry. And we start talking, you get so much strength from other entrepreneurs, and there's an energy that comes from just that camaraderie.
Absolutely. And if you talk to the sharks, they'll say that, you're failing if you're taking a paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody's got a story. Every entrepreneur has a story. Everybody that's successful has a story where they didn't think they were going to make it. Yep. And so that's why, that's part of the reason why we started this, was to hear those stories and to share those other stories, because it's the same thing. We've gone through that as well, having tough times and thinking, well, they're successful and I'm going through a tough time. I'm clearly doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And then it makes you want to shut down and just not do anything at all. Maybe this isn't cut out for me. When really it's like, that's part of the process. Sometimes it takes time. The question is, do you learn from it? So if you made a mistake, that's okay, but are you learning from it? Are you growing? Are you keep at it? Part of it is just not giving up. Yeah,
and that's a hard thing, and yeah, it is. It's a challenge, but it's just a day at a time. And I'd heard something years ago. It was a mindset of just saying, will this matter in 100 years, or will it matter in 1,000 years? And a lot of times we look at the moment, we think of what a big problem that is. But when you can step back and say, is this going to matter in 100 years? No, it's probably not. What are the things that will matter in 100 years from now? And that's helped me a lot to kind of shift the focus of what's really dragging me down versus where's my life going, I guess. And it'll minimize some of those challenges when you're right in the thick of it, and it'll help move on.
Yeah, and so there's this book. It's called The Gap in the Gain. I don't know if you've read that.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we measure ourselves, against our goals that are like far in the future. Most of those goals, like, we'll never reach them because we keep pushing them back. Like, we want that goal to get bigger and bigger, right? And so what we need to do is measure ourselves backwards. Like, how far have you come from, a month ago, 6 months ago, a year from, So it's like, if you measure yourself backwards, you can see your progress, and then it gives you hope for like achieving, the next thing. And really we should do that with everything in our lives, like with the people, our kids, our spouses, our, whatever, because, we constantly are measuring them on this like expectation, instead of like how much have they accomplished, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
You mentioned a moment ago about like having those, like sometimes you're not sure like how long do you stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in those moments, like how did you decide, you know, whether to say, hey, okay, this is something that's not going to work out, I need to stop it, and I need to pivot, or like, no, I need to continue down this path?
Yeah.
How did you make the decision in that moment?
I don't know if anyone ever knows the right time to do that. And it is a balance. And you have to look at kind of indicators and seeing. You know, we think of the common 3 feet from diamonds analogy, where, have you ever heard that? Where
Makes sense. Just
the short version is that this guy buys this diamond mine rights, buys this land. He digs and digs and digs and never finds diamonds and says, okay, it's not working. I'm going to sell the property. He sells it at a loss just because he wants to get rid of the property. It's not working. Someone else comes in and digs 3 more feet and finds the diamonds. And suddenly it's worth all this money. And I think a lot of the times, sometimes we may quit too early. Other times we may stay with a problem or stay with something that we shouldn't be staying with just because it's not going to work and we need to move on. But that delicate balance in the middle is tough. I think back, so I guess I'll give 2 sides of the argument. Is one, there's times, you know, I've had hundreds of employees over the years that I've managed or had work for me. And we've all had those challenging employees. And there's times where you're saying, okay, well, I want to work with them. I want to try to save this. I want to try to help them grow. And so you try to put up with some of those maybe shortcomings or difficulties working with them. And when you finally say, hey, it's not working out, and you move on, you realize, like, why didn't I do that sooner? My business has done better. And you eliminate some of those challenges that you're facing. I've seen the same thing with business is that the right time? Am I going to end this and say I'm going to move on and say, oh, I wish I would have done that sooner? Or am I quitting too early? And I think when I make those decisions, I look at it and say, okay, what are the things that are showing that light at the end of the tunnel? Okay, I've got this account, this customer that's maybe going to come on board. I've maybe got this challenge that's going to be freed up in a couple months. Can I hang on until then? And you have to kind of measure those. Sometimes I'll write it down, like you said. Okay, what are the positives? What are the cons? And is there a chance that this is going to go the way it does? And a lot of times it'll kind of correct and say, I'm glad I hung on.
Yeah. Yeah,
I like that. So you're looking for to see, hey, if I'm in this moment, is there some light at the end of the tunnel? Is there something that might either a pain point that might be removed here in the next little bit, or we know we've got some customers or whatever coming on board in the next month or so, and then just kind of taking it one step at a time. Well, if I can get there, let me reevaluate it, or let me see where we're at then.
Exactly. Yeah, it is a case-by-case scenario, and I think the entrepreneurs, we kind of operate on gut feeling, and I think you just have to rely on that and trust that. And part of it's when you're in your head and you're dealing with all that stress, it's hard to kind of just say, okay, what do I really feel is the right thing here? And I've talked to people that are, you look at their business and you're saying, just jump ship, just be done with this, like move on to something else. And I've admired, there's a couple that come to mind that I have seen firsthand. They've stuck with something that I didn't think they should have stuck with, and they're like, I just feel like I should do it. And it turned into a thriving business. It was a startup they were trying to get off the ground, and I was pessimistic about it, and they were saying, my gut's telling me that this is going to work, and it did. And so, just got to rely on the gut a lot of times.
I love that. What advice could you give to somebody who today, you know, maybe they're thinking of starting a business?
Be willing to be uncomfortable and just go for it. I mean, it's you know, anything you read, you're going to read that businesses fail. You're going to read that there's challenges. It takes longer than expected. You really won't know until you've done it. Take calculated risks. Try to be smart in it. Don't bet the farm on it. You know, make sure you can provide for yourself and your family if you have to. But make sure you have contingency plans. But be ready to jump in. Know that it may not work out. Know that you may hit those challenges, but learn to adapt to them and go forward.
What do you think about those people who, you know, have the 9-to-5 job, right, and they rely on that income to support the family for right now? Do you think it's a good idea for them to, as their business, just kind of start it as a side hustle first? Like keep the main hustle going, start a side hustle that you can start to build out.
I think you certainly can. And I've been in jobs, I know there's some others where maybe in an executive role you're prohibited from doing side hustles. So sometimes you have to make that decision of, can I do that? You know, is my commitment in here? But if you can, certainly that's a good way to test the water. If you can do that without disrupting your family well-being and say, I'm going to take a couple of risks on the side. I'm going to put a little bit of night and weekends into this and see, you can start seeing if you're getting some traction. And then you have to decide, what time do I jump the ship from my full-time job and go all in on this? And that's a whole different discussion. But Yeah, certainly anything you can do that can minimize that risk. I think one other thought that came to mind when you asked that, there's a book by, I think it's Jon Cole, called Quitter, and he says we need to do more quitting. And that sounds really backwards, but when you understand the premise of the book, he says a lot of times we get people that are maybe working a 9 to 5 as an accountant, and they're saying, yeah, I'm an accountant, but I would really love to be a car salesman or whatever it is, or I'd rather start my own business. Too many times we hold up just that decision because we're saying, well, what are the risks with it? And the whole premise of the book is take calculated risk, but be willing to quit. Move right into what you really want to do with your life. And it goes back to that life is short mentality of, do I want to look back and say, well, I stuck with my career and I made a good income all this time, but I really wasn't happy. I didn't really do what I wanted to do. And to me, that's justified a lot of those failures, because it's like, I didn't want to have that regret of staying somewhere and doing one job for 40 to 45 years and not having tried things that excited me.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and so Deepak Chopra has this, he talks about our dharma, right? And so essentially what dharma is like connecting our passion and purpose with service. And ultimately that's what all of our lives are about, is how can we get closer to like our purpose in life, and how like it's going to fulfill us so much more than just doing something we might be good at. But when we can connect that with like how can we serve the world and humanity, like that's really where we'll find the deepest fulfillment in life. Yeah. So I wanted to really quick jump into you're in business consulting. Like why did you start that? Tell us a little bit about it.
I like the variety, as you've probably noticed from entrepreneurship, doing different things. But I learned, throughout some of those failures and some of those challenges and successes, that sometimes as a third party, I'm able to go in and see a business's challenges and recognize what needs to be solved. Mm-hmm. And having dealt with 4 business turnarounds, operating multiple companies, I like that. And part of the time when, I may not have the time to commit to something and go all in on something myself, I'm able to give those skills and those experiences that I have and help put those into another business and help somebody else out. And I love that when somebody's facing a really hard challenge in a business and come in and be able to say, I can help solve this problem for you. Come in, spend some weeks or months with them and get them on track, and they're saying, my business is doing well. There's several that I've been involved with where either the doors have been closed for good or within days or weeks of closing for good. And here 10, 12, 15 years later, they're still in business because of some of those changes that we adopted early on.
That's awesome.
So what size of businesses are you usually consulting?
So I found that where I am able to provide the best value is usually between 1 and 10 million in revenue. I've dealt with a lot of startups, they're looking to raise capital and other things. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of principles that may work for really big businesses that really work for startups. I have done consulting for even a company that was over $100 million in annual revenue. But really the 1 to 10 million seems to be the sweet spot. They've got enough money coming in to where we can shift things around, change profitability, cut certain expenses without making it too lean, and that makes it really, really helpful.
So sometimes you'll go in and you'll kind of analyze like how things are working, and you'll look for the things that are inefficient, and then kind of you can make some changes.
Yeah, usually what's happened is somebody has started a business, they've had a good idea that's something they specialize in. Mm-hmm. Usually it's a hobby that's turned into a business that has started getting traction. Things are kind of at a point where, hey, they're humming along, we're not stressed about payroll, we've at least got money coming in but we know we're inefficient in a lot of ways. It may be that we've been doing things that have worked the last 10 years, but we're now a little bit behind the times on organization structure. Or, man, we're bringing in all this money, I should be making more money than I am. And my employees are all getting paid, but we're making $5 million a year and I'm still not taking home anymore. Great, let's see what we can do on that. So a lot of it's dial in the efficiencies. Okay, how do we streamline the company to where it's producing more profit out of the same revenue, hopefully grow the revenue as well, but that way the owner or shareholders or whoever can take more of that money.
Now, one of the challenges I know, especially for startups, is how to obtain capital. Like, do you have any suggestions that you can share with those people who might be like, I don't know how to start because I can't find the money, whether that's investors or bank or whatever.
There's a lot of options, and I wish I knew some of those things early on. I mean, you naturally go to, okay, what money do I have? I don't have any money, I can't start a business. Okay, well, that might be a challenge. Certainly there's things that could be higher risk, credit cards, HELOC on your house, borrowing on a car. some of those cases may warrant taking that type of risk, but there's certainly a lot of opportunities for grants. There's opportunities for angel investors who are always looking for opportunities. Angel investors want to see some skin in the game. They want to know what type of commitment you're doing, what type of experience you have. But there are opportunities. And a lot of times people hold themselves back because I don't have any money. There's ways to find it. Start asking around. We've got an angel investor group here in Southern Utah, Red Rock Angels, and startups can go and pitch an idea and kind of like a mini Shark Tank, able to seek investment capital to be able to get something off the ground.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Jon.
How long have you had the Red Rock Angels out here?
We've been doing it for 2 years now. We started January of 2023.
Okay.
I was on one of your first pitches.
That's right. That's right. You did a great job. I've seen hundreds of pitches over the years. I've been an angel investor. I think I mentioned I invested in like 12 or 13 different companies, and you kind of see what works from a business point of view. And a lot of times investors can look at it and say, you kind of get a keen interest on what's going to work and what isn't in business. There's a lot of things I see that I'm like, I don't know anything about this industry. I can't opine on that. But I've kind of, part of that startup consulting that I do is really saying, okay, I've seen these pitches. I know it's going to work to get more attention from investors. And there's several that we've gone in, been able to revamp their deck, and they were having struggles raising capital, and they were able to raise 7-figure sums after we kind of dialed in some of those things for them.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. I love that story of having, especially having that here in St. George, where people can come and they can pitch their businesses and can get some advice on how to go to the next level there. Where can people find you if they want to get some business consulting or whatever, join Red Rock Angel Investors or those things? Where
I
can
would
they
say
find you?
LinkedIn's probably going to be the best, most visible place. You can see a little bit about past experience and find me there and send me a message.
Mr. Jon Cole, thank you so much for coming on. We
pleasure.
appreciate you. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely.
Appreciate it.